I think one of the questions that I get frequently asked is, how do I know what I know? I can definitely give credit to the innate wisdom that I was born with, that people and situations then gave me permission to cultivate over time. But the truth is that I started my spiritual journey about 10 years ago, and since then, I've done a hell of a lot of learning. From endless Google searches to hours of YouTube video content watched, podcasts listened to, and of course, mountains of books read. Over time, my knowledge arsenal has grown. I'm very lucky to have been born into a family that has always encouraged curiosity and learning. I was raised with the mentality that I live in a world that is to be endlessly discovered. And so for as long as I can remember, I have been busy acquiring knowledge as if I was attempting to breathe air. I remember comments frequently being made at school that I was teacher's pet because I was constantly asking questions. Even though I believe that the school system doesn't really teach us what we really need to know, and if they do, it really is the tip of the iceberg, I was really lucky to be surrounded by teachers who were actually passionate about their expertise, and even more so, they were similar to me. They were also on their journey of discovery, of figuring out how this world worked. So when I had my spiritual awakening, or should I say reawakening at the age of 15, I naturally flung myself into a wormhole of spiritual education. Since then, there have been 18 books that have been instrumental to shifting my perspective, deepening my growth, and allowing me to take those principles and put them into action and actually begin to create impact in my own life. And those are the 18 books that I'm going to share with you today. Oh, Ishmael, Ishmael, Ishmael. There is a running joke in my life that there are all the books that came before Ishmael, and then there are all those that came after. This book has a really special place in my heart because it was gifted to me by my English teacher for my graduation, because in another lifetime I was supposed to be an English Lit major. By the way, this is the same teacher that used to refer to me as an alien when I was applying for university. So the really interesting thing about Ishmael is that it discusses the way that humanity has led itself to the point that it is in right now, and it alludes to the opportunity we have to create a new future for ourselves as a species. All of it from the point of view of a talking gorilla. And that is literally all I'm going to say about this book, because if I'm going to give this book the justice it deserves, you're just gonna have to read it yourself. So one of the funniest things I hear people say to me is, "But Nina, you're so spiritual and you listen to such heavy rap music. I don't understand." And in my point of view, I believe that God speaks to us in very unique ways, in ways that our systems will understand. I'm a lyricist and a writer at heart, so it makes perfect sense to me that God will communicate to me in rap lyrics. And so when one of my favorite rappers, Russ, released It's All in Your Head, I couldn't wait to get my hands on this book. It's All in Your Head is all about the art of manifestation, which really starts with the power of self-belief. Russ illustrates manifestation principles with examples from his own career, but he uses also a universal language that basically every human understands: music. It's All in Your Head is really short and concise and is really simply written in a way that almost anyone will understand. It's actually a divination tool I often use because I love opening up a page of this book and seeing what messages it has in store for people, because really they're like written in such a very down to earth and funny way that almost anyone can understand, and they tend to be really, really powerful. So because I've mentioned that, I'm actually gonna quickly pull a page and see kind of what message is waiting for us in the book. So let's see. Okay, so it says, saying no to something like that on the surface looks like a dream actualized, takes a high level of intuition influenced insanity. A record deal was a dream, but this one felt like it could turn into a nightmare. The offer was an acknowledgement from the universe that my work was not going unnoticed. Take those acknowledgements as little signs that you're on the right path, that it's just the universe saying to you, keep going. It isn't necessarily saying, this is it. If you approach offers and opportunities from a place of fear that they're only ones on the way, then you put a limit on what you can receive. Instead, appreciate that you and your work are being recognized and sought after. Let that awareness boost your trust in yourself. Don't hesitate, don't doubt, don't even worry about falling. Wings will grow. Jump. So number 3 is Mary Magdalene revealed. For those of you who follow my work, know that I have a deep love for Mary Magdalene, and I'm always amazed by what her very existence gets to mean for humanity, but also the way that we approach divinity. Mary Magdalene Revealed is written by Megan Waterson, who is a Harvard-trained feminist theologian. She unpacks every verse of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. She weaves in her wisdom from her own journey, but she also uses other feminine teachings from around the world to show us a different version of what Christianity might get to mean. One where we begin to trust the whispers of love that comes within our own hearts, and we get to learn that that voice is always there, willing to guide us, as long as we are willing to listen. The Alchemist is one of those classics that when somebody tells you that you should read it, they definitely aren't lying. Similarly to Ishmael, The Alchemist is a piece of fiction that follows the adventure of an Andalusian shepherd boy. The Alchemist is a book that teaches its readers through the power of story, the power of what happens when you are courageously willing to follow the calling of your soul dreams, and actually all the possibilities and opportunities appear when you're willing to listen to that tiny whisper. So this next book that I'm sharing with you, you can tell has been very well loved. It's something that I come back to again and again. And if there is a book that begins to teach women about the feminine principle that lives inside of her, it has to be Women Who Run with the Wolves. Estes is a Jungian psychologist and, to be honest, all-around medicine woman who uses the power of myth and folktales and stories to begin to outline the wild woman archetype. Through these stories, she teaches us women how do we re-access that natural part of us when we feel we have severed and lost that connection. This next book, Whatever Arises, Love That, I think is a must-have for anybody that identifies as either a highly sensitive or an empath. Very often on the spiritual journey, we are frequently talking about this idea of integrating the ego. But we put a lot of emphasis on the inflated ego, and we don't always talk about the inferior ego. Whatever Arises, Love That addresses this part of ourselves, especially as highly sensitives, where there have been moments in our lives that we've probably felt like we've been victimized. Not all of us, but many of us, and how to begin to address the inferior ego that is left because of that lower self-esteem from trauma and pain and not so nice experiences. In this book, Matt Kahn gives empowering tools and practices that allows us to stop waiting for someone out there to show up for our hearts in a way that often only we can. Every single word in this book is a reminder why we are always worthy of more love and not less, especially when we feel like we are experiencing emotions or we are acting in a way that is a little bit unfavorable. I currently don't have a copy of this book to show you right now as I lent it to a friend, so for number 7 I have added an insert somewhere over here, somewhere. To describe the power that becoming supernatural grants you when you apply the tools that Joe Dispenza gives you to your day-to-day life would be an impossible task. Becoming Supernatural is one of those books where spirituality and science begin to meet. Joe sheds light on the way that living in survival can so often make us sick, spiritually, mentally, and even physically. He sheds light on the malleability of our personality. He talks about the power of what happens when our heart and mind begins to move in coherence, and he gives us the meditative tools to be able to create a vision for our life so compelling that the reality we have known up to this point literally begins to shift. What I find so powerful about this book, aside from the exercises that are in it, are the real life stories that illustrate what is actually possible. There's also data and graphs to continue that same vein of thought, and it literally reminds you that if somebody else that came from circumstances you might not even have believed were possible and achieve healing and powerful shift in their life, then why can't you as well? In my opinion, Patriarchy Stress Disorder is a must-read for those of us trying to understand how trauma affects us, especially as women. In this book, Dr. Valerie Rain explores the way that even the most high-achieving of women often feel an unexplainable amount of unfulfillment, and that the disconnection from our authentic wants and needs are often not our fault. In this book, you learn about the power of the personal trauma you may have experienced, but also that the weight that we often bear is also collective and ancestral. In this book, she gives practical tools to move out of how much can I bear and instead to the reality that we all deserve, which is how good can it get? The 12 Faces of the Goddess is a book that I pick up again and again. This book is a beautiful combination between astrology and ritual. In this book, Daniel Blackwood explores the way the wheels of the seasons as well as the zodiac wheel can be assigned to a particular goddess. She explores their myths, and then we're able to see the way their stories are similar to the zodiacs they have been assigned to, and then we are invited to activate those energies into our own life. This book is filled with beautiful meditation journeys to meet each one of the goddesses. It is filled with spell crafting and ritual crafting, and it is filled with a ton of correspondences for each zodiac and season that have everything to do with essential oils and crystals and so much more. If there is a book that I would recommend to every witch starting out on her path, it would definitely be Spiral Dance. Even though this book is heavily Wicca based, I think it's an integral starting point when beginning to explore the goddess as the forefront of your spiritual practice. In this book, Starhawk covers everything from how to create a sacred space to the power of trance in our magical workings. The book is filled with energetic practices, rituals for every Sabbath, and spell work even most beginners can get the hang of. One of the things that I wanted to highlight was one of the things that really astonished me about this book was how young Starhawk was when she wrote it. Even though since then there have been deepened copies published with like additional notes, the fact that she was so young was very much a permission slip that I get to trust the wisdom and the knowledge that I have acquired now, because there is somebody that I get to help and get to serve, and that on my ongoing journey there will be more wisdom acquired and I will be able to share it as such. So Kirk is one of those books that I also think every witch should read on her journey, despite the fact that it is a piece of fiction. In Magdalene Mayer's retelling of the myth of the first pharmakia, aka witch in Greek mythology, Kirk outlines the power that we choose to shape our own future when we choose the magic way, and that often that power comes from the most unlikely of places. Claim Your Power is a book that was recommended to me by one of my very, very close friends from back home. And I highly recommend it to anyone who is looking to step further into their purpose and to shed any fears that might be holding them back. What I love about Mastin Kipp's work in general is that he intricately understands the way that trauma lives in our body and the way it is capable from holding us back from living a very expansive, fulfilling, and nourishing life. Claim Your Power is a 40-day journey where we begin to identify what it is exactly that is holding us back, and then through that journey begin to step into our power. Mastin Kipp, rightfully so, teaches us in this book that the very survival tactics that we learned are also the same gifts that we get to serve other people with when we begin to up-level them from a trauma-informed place. Number 13 on my list is The Book of Joy. This outstanding book is an ongoing conversation between the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, all about this powerful topic of joy. Not only does Douglas Abrams ask powerful questions, the way that he depicts this beautiful friendship between these two men, it was an absolute honor to read. We realize that these two men come from completely different worlds, but they still speak the same language. It was also so beautiful to be able to read about the rapport and the humor that they share together, and that although both of these men have seen so much, there's still so much joy living in both of them, which makes sense why they wrote this book. One thing that we learn in this book is that joy is an intentional practice. And it is something that is very, very different than when we are just chasing a much more fleeting emotion like happiness. Alchemical Psychology by Thomas F. Cavalli is a book that I randomly picked out in a witchy London bookstore that I did not expect to have the impact that it did. This book is a powerful meeting between alchemy and psychology, and one of the things that Dr. Cavalli teaches us is that not only were alchemists trying to physically change lead into gold, first and foremost, they were trying to shift lead into gold into their own consciousness. Dr. Cavalli is a Jungian psychologist, so apart from talking about alchemical processes as well as the history of alchemy, he gives us practical tools and exercises that he uses with his own patients to be able to transform their psyche. So, how could I possibly include Mary Magdalene revealed and not include the Gospel of Mary Magdalene itself in this particular list? To be fully transparent, I'm actually still reading this because even though the Gospel itself has very few lines and there's also the additional analysis from Jean-Yves Lulu. There is so much to be studied and digested because it just really tells us who was Mary Magdalene in the story, how influential she was in the unfolding of Christianity, and it actually tells us about a Christianity we are not often taught in the mainstream. One where we are shown that we create our reality through the power of our creative intelligence, and that God is not somewhere out there, but actually lives within. So the next book on my list is, again, for all my little witchlings out there, and it is The Modern Guide to Witchcraft by Skye Alexander. Similar to Spiral Dance, it is extremely Wicca based, and it is very much a beginner's book, introducing you to many of the same concepts that you may have learned in Spiral Dance, but in a little bit of a different way. So just have that in mind when you are getting this book. What I really enjoyed about this book is the spell section. There are such an extensive amount of spells for beginners especially, and it really begins to give us a grasp of the power of possibility that we have when we use magic to be able to elicit a preferred outcome. Poetry often speaks to us in ways that normal words cannot. And I think The Prophet by Khalil Gibran is such a beautiful testament to that. This beautiful book is filled with wisdom about how to live a fulfilling life, one where we revere the sacred. Because this book is as powerful as it is, I'm going to take a moment to read one of the poems to you, and if it's something that speaks to you, I really do invite you to get a copy of your own. So, let's take a look. Then Almitria spoke again and said, "And what of marriage, master?" And he answered, saying, "You were born together, and together you shall be forevermore. You shall be together when the white wings of death scatter your days. You shall be together even in the silent memory of God. But let there be spaces in your togetherness, and let the winds of the heavens dance between you. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your soul. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but let each one of you be alone. Even as the string of a lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not in each other's keeping, for only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, yet not too near together, for the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadow." Last but definitely not least is Old Style Conjure, which is a book that is centered all around hoodoo, root work, and folk magic. It is not unknown in the magical community that a lot of the mainstream publishers and the well-known books that we know are all around Wicca, which is why I actually have so much praise for this book. Even though I don't practice hoodoo myself because it's not part of the heritage that I belong to, I do understand that part of my duty as a witch is to broaden the way that I see my magic. And so not only do you learn about the practices that they engage in hoodoo, but you also are given historical context for how these practices came about when slaves were finally brought to the United States. Something that dawned on me while reading this book is how humans are capable to adapt to change, and that often we are capable of creating impact in our lives just through very mundane moments and tools. It's an ongoing reminder that the first step of living a magical life, or just being someone who believes that we're capable of shifting the outcomes that are around us, it starts with the energy that we hold, the intentions that we set, and the words that we speak first, and all of the material stuff and tools really are just an added bonus. Oh, we made it. So, even though there's probably hundreds more books that I could include to this list, these 18 books are books that either really impacted my journey, or they were lovely introductions to a new aspect that I was ready to explore on my path. But before I sign off, there is one last thing that I want to say. And that is, most of the time, especially when we begin our journey, we have a tendency to consume knowledge. We may jump from book to book, not always fully integrating the practical lessons that they offer. So my only piece of advice is if you're going to pick up one of these books, especially the ones that include practical exercises and action steps, is that you please take your time with them. We so often get told that knowledge is power, but I often think that statement is incomplete. Knowledge is power, but knowledge only becomes knowledge when it is embodied. All right, cool. That's a wrap. I'm out. Deuces.